The rancher hired an Apache widow to clean the barn, then found his children asleep in her arms. His wife had passed away some years ago, leaving him with two young children, Emma and Ben, and a ranch that seemed to grow more demanding with every passing season. Every morning, John woke before sunrise, his body aching from years of labor, but his mind never rested. There were fences to mend, horses to feed, fields to tend, and a barn that had begun to fall into disrepair. He loved his children more than anything, but managing them alongside the endless chores felt impossible at times. The children were young, Emma, 7, with her mother's bright eyes and curious nature, and Ben, 5, a quiet boy with a shy smile who preferred watching the animals to playing with other children. Both of them missed their mother terribly, though they tried to hide their sadness behind laughter and small games. John, too, carried the weight of their loss, feeling it most keenly during quiet moments when the ranch was still, and he could hear nothing but the wind whistling through the dry trees. One afternoon, John sat on the porch, wiping sweat from his brow after a long morning of repairing the fence along the northern pasture. His hands were calloused, the nails broken in places, but he didn't mind. He had always found satisfaction in the tangible proof of work done. Still, as he looked at the sprawling property and the long list of chores that remained, a heavy weariness settled in his chest. He knew he couldn't do it all alone, not for much longer anyway. He had tried hiring temporary help before, but none of the workers lasted long. Most were only in it for the money, and a few didn't have the patience or the care needed to handle children or animals. The ranch wasn't just land and livestock. It was a living, breathing world, and he needed someone who understood that. Someone steady, reliable, and kind. And as he thought about this, he realized that maybe it was time to look for someone outside the usual channels. Someone with a quiet strength that could not be measured in experience alone. The next morning, John placed an ad in the local paper, simple and straightforward. Barn cleaning and caretaker work available. Must be reliable and responsible. Experience helpful but not required. He didn't expect many responses. Living in a small town, most people either had their own work or weren't interested in the long hours the ranch demanded. But within a few days, several replies arrived, and one in particular caught his attention. Yana's letter was brief, written with careful words and a calm tone. She explained that she was an Apache widow, recently bereaved, and looking for honest work to support herself. She spoke of her past life, of small jobs she had done for neighbors, and of her ability to handle hard work without complaint. But what stood out most was the quiet dignity in her writing, the sense that she had endured hardship and come through it with her spirit intact. John read her words twice, then folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He didn't know much about her, but something about her presence seemed different from the others who had written. When Ayana arrived at the ranch the following week, she carried little more than a small satchel and a quiet confidence. She wore simple clothing, suitable for work, and her eyes held a calm that John had rarely seen in strangers. The first impression was one of respect and composure. She didn't rush or speak too much, but her movements were deliberate, careful, and full of an unspoken understanding of what needed to be done. John watched as she surveyed the barn. It was old and dusty, with the smell of hay and horse feed lingering in the air. The floor was uneven, and several beams needed reinforcement, but Ayana seemed to see the work not as a burden but as a task waiting to be done. She rolled up her sleeves and without hesitation began sweeping, organizing, and inspecting every corner. Her efficiency impressed John, but it was her patience that struck him most. She handled the animals with care, speaking softly to the horses and calming them with gentle gestures. Emma and Ben, curious about the new person in their home, watched from a distance. At first they were shy, uncertain whether they could trust her. Their mother had always been the center of warmth in the house, and anyone new felt like an intruder at first. But Ayanna didn't try to force friendship. She let them come to her, letting them approach in their own time, speaking softly when they did and always with a gentle smile. She seemed to understand their cautious hearts, and slowly they began to warm to her presence. Days turned into weeks, and Ayanna became a steady presence on the ranch. She worked tirelessly, cleaning the barn, repairing fences, feeding animals, and helping wherever she was needed. John noticed how the children began to follow her around the property, asking questions about the horses, helping her with small chores, or simply sitting nearby as she worked. Ayanna never pushed them. She simply included them, allowing them to learn and grow under her quiet guidance. One evening, after a particularly long day, John found himself sitting on the porch again, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The ranch looked different somehow. The barn was cleaner, the animals calmer, and there was a sense of order that hadn't existed before. But more than that, there was a sense of peace in the air, a feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, they could all get through this life together. John realized he hadn't felt this calm in months. Still, there was a cautious part of him that held back. Hiring someone was one thing, but allowing them into the lives of his children was another. He had to be careful. Ayanna was kind, but he didn't want to risk anyone's heart unnecessarily. And yet, every evening, he watched as the children laughed and played, sometimes sharing stories with her, sometimes simply enjoying her company. The fear of letting someone new into their lives began to soften, replaced by a quiet hope. One afternoon, as Ayanna worked in the barn, Emma and Ben approached her with shy smiles. "Can we help?" Emma asked, holding a small broom. Ben followed with a bucket, eager to join in. Ayanna knelt down, her eyes meeting theirs, and nodded. "Of course," she said softly, "we can do this together." That simple invitation marked the beginning of a deeper connection. John watched from a distance, feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude. Perhaps this woman could do more than help with chores. Perhaps she could help heal their hearts, too. Ayanna never spoke much about her past unless asked, and even then she chose her words carefully. She had lost her husband in an accident, leaving her to navigate life alone. The pain was evident in her eyes at times, but it never slowed her work or her care for the children. She carried herself with a quiet strength, showing that resilience didn't always come with loud declarations. It often came in gentle acts of patience, understanding, and unwavering dedication. John began to trust her more each day. Not just as a worker, but as someone who could bring stability and kindness to his home. He still maintained his watchful eye, of course, but he found himself easing into the idea that perhaps, in this unexpected stranger, they had found more than help. They had found a guardian of sorts, someone who could care for his children when he couldn't be there. And so life on the ranch began to change, subtly at first. The barn was cleaner, the chores more manageable, and the children happier. But beyond the practical improvements, there was an unseen shift, a sense of hope, warmth, and the possibility of healing. John Carson, once weary and burdened, began to feel the faint stirrings of relief. Maybe they weren't alone in this world after all. Maybe help came in the quiet, steady form of someone like Ayanna, who had walked through her own trials and arrived at their doorstep, ready to bring her strength to theirs. After the first few weeks, Ayanna had become a quiet but steady part of life on the Carson ranch. Her presence was no longer something the children cautiously observed from afar. It was now a constant rhythm in their days. Each morning, she arrived just as the sun began to rise, her soft steps blending with the creaking of the barn doors and the low whinnies of the horses. She greeted the animals first, speaking gently to each one, and then turned her attention to the chores that needed tending. John watched her work from a distance at first, as he did every day, noting her care and attention to detail. But gradually, he began to trust her enough to focus on other tasks, knowing that she would handle the barn and the children with the patience he couldn't always summon himself. Emma and Ben had started to warm to Ayanna in a way that surprised John. Emma, usually outgoing but cautious, would often find reasons to be near her, carrying small tools or buckets as she asked questions about the horses. Ben, the quieter of the two, preferred to watch her work from the edge of the barn, fascinated by how she seemed to move with both strength and gentleness. Ayanna never pushed them, never insisted that they join her. She allowed them to approach her on their own terms, speaking softly and patiently, and always making sure their small efforts were acknowledged. Slowly, the children began to trust her in a way that John hadn't expected so soon. One day, John decided to take a short break from his own work to watch the interaction more closely. The morning was bright, with sunlight pouring into the open fields and warming the dust-covered barn floor. Emma carried a small broom, trying to sweep alongside Ayanna, while Ben held a bucket filled with soapy water. Ayanna showed them how to scrub the barn stalls without hurting the animals or themselves. Her instructions were simple and clear, but her tone was kind, filled with encouragement rather than reprimand. "Good job, Emma," she said softly. "You're getting the hang of it. See how clean it looks now." Emma beamed, her small hands working eagerly to follow Ayanna's example. John felt a strange relief wash over him. It wasn't just that the barn was being cleaned or that the chores were being shared. It was the way his children were beginning to laugh again, to feel at home, even in the midst of their grief. For so long, he had worried that they were growing up too quickly, burdened by the absence of their mother. But now, watching Ayanna interact with them, he realized that kindness and patience could heal wounds in a way that strict discipline or even his best intentions could not. Ayanna's own story unfolded slowly, revealed in small, careful pieces. On one afternoon, when a sudden rainstorm swept over the ranch, John found himself helping her guide a frightened horse back into the barn. As the rain pelted the wooden roof, she spoke quietly about the life she had once had, the home she had shared with her late husband, and the hard times she had faced since his passing. There was no bitterness in her words, only a quiet acceptance and strength born of necessity. John listened without interruption, surprised at how natural it felt to share in her story. It was a rare connection, one that went beyond work or duty. It was human, honest, and healing in a way he hadn't expected. The children were watching from a safe distance, eyes wide with curiosity. Emma tugged at Ben's sleeve. "She sounds so brave," she whispered. Ben nodded, his face thoughtful. Ayanna's strength didn't intimidate them, it inspired them. They could sense the quiet courage in her voice, the steady determination in her hands, and they began to see her not just as a helper, but as someone who could be counted on, someone who cared for them in ways they hadn't realized they needed. Over time, Ayanna began to notice small details about the children that no one else had. She noticed Emma's habit of twisting her hair when she was anxious and gently reminded her to take a deep breath. She noticed Ben's shyness when meeting new people and encouraged him to speak at his own pace, never forcing him into situations he wasn't ready for. She observed their moods and adjusted her approach accordingly, always patient, always kind. John, seeing this, felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had hoped for someone reliable to help with chores, but he hadn't expected someone who would nurture his children's spirits as well as their daily needs. One morning, as the sun rose over the desert horizon, Ayanna led the children to a small patch of wildflowers near the edge of the pasture. "These will bloom soon," she told them softly. "We can watch them grow, just like you too." Emma's eyes lit up as she bent down to examine a tiny bud pushing through the soil. Ben knelt beside her, touching the petals with a gentle hand. It was a small moment, quiet and unremarkable in some ways, but to John, it represented the gentle care Ayanna brought into their lives. She wasn't just completing chores, she was teaching the children about patience, observation, and appreciation for the little things, a lesson he had struggled to convey on his own. Evenings on the ranch became quieter, more peaceful. After the chores were done and the animals settled, Ayana would help the children with small tasks like organizing their toys or reading short stories. She had a calming presence that made the children feel safe, even when the world outside felt unpredictable. John often found them gathered together in the barn, with Emma reading aloud and Ben leaning against Ayana, listening intently. It was a scene that warmed his heart, and he allowed himself a rare moment of relief. Perhaps with Ayana's help, they could find stability and even happiness again. But life on a ranch was never without its challenges. One afternoon, a group of stray calves wandered near the edge of the property, and the children became frightened at the prospect of them causing trouble. Gianna calmly led them back toward the barn, keeping her voice soft but firm. She explained the situation in a way they could understand, turning fear into a lesson. "Sometimes things happen that scare us," she said, "but we can face them together, carefully and patiently." Emma and Ben nodded, understanding more than they could express in words. John watched from a distance, marveling at her ability to transform even small crises into opportunities for teaching and reassurance. It wasn't long before John began to see subtle changes in himself as well. The constant pressure and fatigue he carried began to feel lighter, not because the work had lessened, but because he was no longer carrying it entirely alone. Yana's presence allowed him moments of pause, moments where he could step back and appreciate the beauty of the land, the laughter of his children, or even the quiet majesty of the desert sky at sunset. He had always been a solitary man, relying on his own strength, but he began to understand that relying on others didn't make him weak. It made life more bearable, richer, and fuller. The bond between the children and Ayana grew steadily. Emma would often bring her small drawings to show her, proud of her work and eager for feedback. Ben began to ask questions about the animals and chores, learning from her quietly and absorbing her patience like a sponge. Ayana never made them feel rushed or inadequate. She celebrated their small successes and gently guided them through mistakes. John watched, amazed at the transformation. His children were not only learning practical skills, but they were also learning kindness, resilience, and trust. As the days passed, John realized that Ayana's impact went beyond her work on the ranch. She had become a thread woven into the fabric of their lives, connecting them in ways that neither he nor his children could have anticipated. The barn, once just a place of labor, became a place of comfort and quiet connection. The children laughed more freely, slept more peacefully, and felt a sense of safety that had been missing since their mother's passing. One afternoon, John returned from the fields to find Ayana and the children sitting together on the barn steps, sharing a simple meal. The sky was painted with the warm hues of sunset, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cows, the rustle of the wind through the trees, and the occasional chirp of a bird returning to its nest. John paused, taking in the scene. The sight of his children relaxed and happy in Ayana's company stirred something deep within him. He understood in that moment that hiring her had been the right decision, not just for the chores, but for the heart of their family. Though he had been cautious, unsure of what a stranger might bring into their lives, John realized that Ayana was more than a worker. She was a quiet guardian, a steady presence, and a source of gentle guidance for the children. Her patience, wisdom, and kindness were transforming their home into something richer, warmer, and more hopeful. And as he watched Emma and Ben laughing together, Ayana's soft smile watching over them, John felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long while, John allowed himself to imagine a future where life on the ranch wasn't just about survival, but about growth, connection, and healing. He didn't yet know how far this bond would go or how deeply Ayana would become a part of their lives, but he felt a quiet certainty that, with her presence, the Carson family was beginning a new chapter, one filled with hope, resilience, and the gentle strength of a woman who had endured loss yet still had so much love to give. The summer heat had begun to ease, giving way to the early signs of a stormy season. The sky over the Carson ranch darkened with thick clouds that rolled in slowly from the distant mountains. John Carson was in the fields, tending to a stubborn group of cattle that had wandered too close to the fence line. The wind began to pick up, tugging at his hat and carrying the scent of rain and wet earth. He glanced toward the barn and noticed the children were still outside, trailing behind Ayanna as she led them back to the safety of the wooden structure. Ayanna had sensed the change in the weather long before John did. Her eyes scanned the horizon, noting the darkening clouds and the first flashes of lightning in the distance. She moved with quiet urgency, guiding Emma and Ben as gently as she could, making sure neither of them tripped over loose rocks or the uneven ground of the pasture. "Stay close to me," she said softly, her voice calm but firm. "The wind is picking up and the storm is coming quickly. We'll be safe inside." The children nodded, clutching her hands, trusting her completely. By the time they reached the barn, the first raindrops had begun to fall, heavy and cold against their skin. The wind rattled the loose boards and howled through the gaps in the roof. Emma shivered, and Ben clung to Ayanna's side, his small hands gripping her sleeve. Ayanna quickly ushered them inside, closing the barn doors against the rising gusts. The animals, sensing the storm, moved restlessly in their stalls, whinnying and stamping their hooves. Ayanna's voice cut through the chaos, calm and soothing. "It's all right, everyone. We're safe here. The storm will pass and the animals are fine. Let's help them stay calm." John arrived shortly afterward, his coat drenched and his hat nearly blown off by the wind. He paused in the doorway, catching sight of a scene that made his heart tighten with both relief and awe. Ayanna had gathered Emma and Ben in a corner of the barn, wrapping her shawl around them as they huddled close to her. The children's eyes were wide with fear, but Ayanna's gentle presence calmed them in a way that he could never achieve alone. She whispered softly, her voice like a warm blanket against the storm's fury, telling them stories, singing low lullabies and rocking them gently in her arms. John stood frozen for a moment, watching the children's trembling bodies relax, their heads resting against her chest. Ben had already closed his eyes, lulled by the rhythm of her voice, and Emma's grip on Ayanna's hand had loosened as sleep began to claim her. John realized then that he had never seen his children so completely at peace since their mother had passed away. Ayanna wasn't just protecting them from the storm outside. She was shielding them from the fear and uncertainty that had crept into their lives over the past few years. The rain continued to pour, pounding the roof of the barn with a relentless rhythm. Lightning lit up the interior, briefly illuminating the tired but serene faces of Emma and Ben. Ayanna's shawl was wrapped tightly around them, and she whispered softly, recounting stories of animals she had known, of small lessons in courage and patience. Her voice never rose, never faltered, and John felt a deep sense of gratitude for the calm she brought into the chaos. He had expected someone to clean the barn, perhaps tend to chores, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. John approached slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile peace. He knelt a short distance away, watching as Ayanna continued to rock the children. She looked up at him briefly, her eyes meeting his with a silent acknowledgement, a quiet understanding that no words were necessary. He nodded subtly, a gesture of respect and trust. In that moment, he realized something profound. Ayanna had become more than a helper. She had become a guardian of their hearts, someone who could reach where he could not. As the storm raged on, John took a moment to observe the barn itself. The animals had settled under her calm influence, and even the horses, usually skittish during bad weather, were standing quietly, sensing her steady presence. It was as though her calm had spread through the entire barn, touching every living creature within it. John marveled at how one person, with patience, kindness, and courage could create such a ripple of calm in a world that often seemed overwhelming and uncontrollable. Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of letting up. The wind continued to howl, and the rain hammered the wooden roof with steady intensity. Yet inside the barn, time moved differently. The children slept peacefully in Ayanna's arms, their small breaths rising and falling in rhythm with her gentle movements. John found himself sitting nearby, leaning against a post, feeling a quiet peace that he hadn't known in years. He thought of all the nights he had spent worrying about the children, all the days he had faced alone on the ranch, and he realized that this simple act of love and protection was more powerful than any work or effort he could have offered. In the dim light of the barn, John noticed small details that brought him both comfort and a touch of awe. Ayanna's hands, strong and capable from years of labor, were now tender and protective, holding his children with a gentleness that seemed almost sacred. The shawl around them was worn and simple, but it radiated warmth and safety. Her voice, steady and melodic, continued to soothe Emma and Ben, weaving a cocoon of security around them even as the storm raged outside. John's mind wandered back to the day he had first hired her. He remembered the letter she had written, the calm dignity in her words, and the quiet strength she had carried with her. At the time, he had only seen a capable worker, someone who could handle the chores and perhaps help him manage the ranch. But now he understood that her true value went far beyond labor. She had a gift for understanding and nurturing, for bringing calm and hope to hearts that had been heavy with grief and fear. The storm began to subside slowly, the rain thinning to a steady drizzle, the wind losing its fierce edge. Yet inside the barn, the quiet scene remained unchanged. Emma and Ben continued to sleep, their small forms nestled against Ayanna, her arms wrapped around them protectively. John watched, feeling a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the safety she had provided, but for the love and care that had transformed a frightening moment into one of comfort and trust. As the first rays of sunlight began to break through the clouds, John knew that life on the ranch had irrevocably changed. The storm, which had seemed so threatening at first, had revealed something deeper, a bond that went beyond work, beyond duty, beyond simple kindness. Ayanna had become part of their family in a way that words could hardly capture. She had shown that care, patience, and quiet courage could heal wounds that seemed impossible to mend. After the children woke, blinking sleep from their eyes, John observed how naturally they turned to Ayanna, seeking her guidance and comfort without hesitation. Emma hugged her tightly, a small smile breaking across her face, while Ben reached for her hand, his eyes full of trust. John realized that the storm had not only passed outside, but within their hearts as well. The fear and uncertainty that had lingered for so long had been replaced with a sense of safety, security, and hope. From that day forward, the barn became more than a workplace. It became a place of refuge, learning, and connection. The children no longer saw it as just a barn. They saw it as a safe place where they were cared for, where they could grow and explore under the watchful eyes of someone who loved them. John, too, began to see it differently. It was no longer just part of the ranch. It was a symbol of resilience, trust, and the quiet power of one person's love and dedication. In the weeks that followed, the storm became a story the family would often recall, a moment that had crystallized their trust and connection. John would sometimes find himself smiling quietly, remembering the sight of his children asleep in Ayanna's arms, and he would feel a warmth that had been absent for far too long. He understood that life on the ranch would continue to be hard, that there would be more storms, both literal and metaphorical. But he also knew that with Ayanna by their side, they could face them together, with courage, patience, and love. It was a lesson in trust and care that John would carry with him forever. Ayanna had not only cleaned the barn or tended to chores, she had opened a path toward healing, hope, and connection. And in that quiet, storm-battered barn, with the rain falling softly outside and the children finally at peace in her arms, John Carson realized that sometimes help comes in forms that are far more powerful than he could have ever imagined. After the storm had passed, life on the Carson Ranch settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and quietly transformative. The children seemed lighter, happier, as if a weight had been lifted from their young shoulders. Emma laughed more freely, chasing after the chickens or helping Ayanna feed the horses without hesitation. Ben, who had once been shy and cautious, began to explore the ranch with a growing sense of confidence, asking questions about the animals and the land. John noticed these changes every day, and while he had expected some improvement with help around the chores, he was astonished at the emotional transformation taking place before his eyes. Ayanna continued her work with the same quiet dedication she had always shown. She cleaned the barn thoroughly, tended to the animals, repaired fences, and organized the tools and supplies, but her influence went far beyond chores. She had a gift for observing the children, understanding their moods, and finding ways to nurture them without ever making them feel pressured. One morning, she noticed Emma sitting alone near the old well, her shoulders slumped and her expression distant. Ayanna knelt beside her and asked gently, "What's on your mind, Emma?" The girl hesitated at first, then whispered about missing her mother. Ayanna listened, nodding with empathy, never interrupting, and finally said softly, "It's okay to feel sad. Your mother loved you very much, and it's all right to remember her, but we can also make each day beautiful together." Emma's small smile returned, and she hugged Ayanna's arm, feeling the comfort of someone who truly understood her heart. John watched from a distance, feeling a mix of gratitude and relief. For months, he had struggled to comfort his children, unsure if his words or presence were enough. Ayanna, without even trying, had filled the gaps in ways he could not. Her patience, her calmness, and her quiet wisdom were shaping their lives in subtle but meaningful ways. He realized that the barn, once a place of hard work and solitude, had become a sanctuary for the family, largely because of her presence. As days turned into weeks, Ayanna's bond with the children grew even stronger. She involved them in her daily tasks, teaching them the value of responsibility, care, and patience. When feeding the horses, she would show Ben how to gently stroke their muzzles and speak softly to calm them. Emma learned to sweep the barn carefully, stacking hay neatly, and helping prepare feed for the animals. Ayanna praised their efforts, not with grand words but with small, heartfelt acknowledgments that made the children feel seen and appreciated. "Well done, Emma," she would say. "I can tell you took care with your work." "That's wonderful." These simple words, spoken with sincerity, made the children glow with pride and motivated them to continue learning and helping. John, too, found his relationship with the children subtly changing. He was no longer constantly overwhelmed with worry or frustration. Ayanna's presence allowed him to step back at times, observing the family dynamic and realizing that his children were thriving under her gentle guidance. He started to open up to her as well, sharing his own challenges, fears, and memories. One evening, as they worked together repairing a fence, he spoke of his wife, of the life they had shared, and of the deep sadness that had lingered after her passing. Ayanna listened quietly, never offering judgment or advice unless he asked, simply providing a safe space for him to speak and be heard. Her own story continued to emerge slowly. She spoke to John about her life as an Apache widow, the love she had shared with her late husband, and the grief she had endured after his sudden death. She never dwelled on sorrow, instead focusing on how she had found strength to continue, how she had learned to care for herself while still helping others. John admired her courage, seeing in her a resilience that matched the harsh beauty of the desert landscape around them. Her past had shaped her, but it did not define her. She carried both her losses and her hope with quiet grace, teaching the Carson family that strength could be gentle and care could be brave. The children's trust in Ayanna deepened through small, everyday moments. On a warm afternoon, she led them to the orchard behind the barn, where the first apples of the season were ripening. "We'll pick these together," she said softly, showing them how to reach for the fruit without damaging the branches. Emma and Ben laughed as they tried to match her careful movements, learning not just about picking apples, but about patience, precision, and respect for life. Later, they sat under the shade of a tree, sharing the fruit and talking quietly about their day. John, watching from a distance, felt a warmth in his chest. These moments were not extraordinary by themselves, but together they wove a tapestry of trust, comfort, and quiet joy that had been missing from their lives for so long. Gianna's influence was not limited to the children. John found himself growing calmer, more reflective, and more patient. She had a way of reminding him, without speaking outright, that life on the ranch could be demanding but also rewarding. He began to appreciate the beauty in small victories, like a well-repaired fence, a clean barn, or a child's laughter. He started to participate more intentionally in the children's learning, asking questions, guiding them gently, and taking moments to enjoy their company rather than constantly worrying about work. Gianna had taught him, without ever saying it, that family life was about connection, care, and shared experience, not just survival. One particularly quiet morning, the family sat together in the barn after chores were done. Gianna had prepared a simple breakfast, and the children ate eagerly, chatting about the animals and their small adventures. John observed the scene and realized that the barn had become a place of comfort and warmth, far beyond its practical purpose. The animals moved calmly among them. Emma and Ben laughed freely, and Ayanna's presence wove a sense of security and love through the entire space. John felt gratitude he could hardly put into words. He had hired a helper, but in return they had all received something far more profound: a connection, a sense of belonging, and a quiet reassurance that life could be gentle even after loss. Even small challenges on the ranch became opportunities for teaching and growth. When a sudden wind knocked over a pile of hay, Ayanna turned the accident into a lesson for the children, showing them how to lift safely, organize efficiently, and work together. Emma and Ben learned quickly, encouraged by her calm guidance and positive reinforcement. John, standing nearby, realized that the children were not only learning practical skills, but also developing resilience, patience, and teamwork, qualities that would stay with them for life. Through all of these experiences, trust between John and Ayanna grew steadily. He began to rely on her not just for chores or childcare, but for wisdom, judgment, and support. He confided in her about the worries he carried, the long-term sustainability of the ranch, the children's education, and the emotional scars left by loss. Gianna listened with empathy, never interrupting, never offering unsolicited advice, but always guiding him gently when he asked for her opinion. Her quiet strength became an anchor in his life, a source of reassurance that he had never known he needed. The children, too, began to see Ayanna as a constant presence in their lives, someone they could trust and turn to in times of need. One afternoon, when Ben fell while exploring near the creek, he ran to her without hesitation, tears in his eyes. Ayanna scooped him up, checked for injuries, and comforted him with soothing words and gentle hands. Emma joined them, holding his hand and smiling, knowing that Ayanna's care would keep them safe. John, witnessing this, felt a swell of emotion. She had become more than a caretaker. She had become a guardian, a mentor, and a friend to all of them. As the weeks passed, the Carson family began to settle into a life that was not perfect, but harmonious. Chores were done efficiently, the children laughed more often, and John felt a sense of partnership he hadn't experienced in years. He realized that life on the ranch, while still demanding, had become lighter because of Ayanna's presence. Her work was more than physical. It was emotional, spiritual, and deeply transformative. She had brought a sense of balance to their lives, showing them that love, patience, and care could create stability in a world that often seemed chaotic and overwhelming. By the time the first hints of autumn appeared in the desert landscape, John understood that Ayanna had become indispensable. She had transformed not just the barn, but the entire household. The children's laughter filled the air, the animals were calm and well-tended, and the ranch itself seemed to hum with quiet contentment. John often found himself watching her interact with the children, marveling at her patience, her wisdom, and her unwavering kindness. He knew, without a doubt, that she had changed their lives in ways that would last far beyond the present moment. And in quiet reflections, John understood that Ayanna's presence had also healed him. The loneliness, fear, and uncertainty that had weighed on him for years were slowly replaced with trust, hope, and a renewed sense of purpose. He no longer felt that he had to bear everything alone. The barn, once a place of endless labor and worry, had become a home, a place of learning, care, and quiet joy. And it was all because of the gentle, steady, and courageous woman who had arrived on his doorstep one ordinary day, ready to help, and ended up becoming something extraordinary in their lives. By the time autumn had fully arrived, the Carson Ranch had transformed. The once chaotic and lonely life that John had endured alone was now filled with warmth, laughter, and an unmistakable sense of connection. The barn, which had once smelled only of hay and dust, had become a place of comfort, learning, and quiet joy. The children no longer approached their days with fear or sadness. Instead, Emma and Ben greeted each morning with excitement, eager to explore the land, care for the animals, and spend time with Ayanna, who had become as much a part of their family as anyone else. John often found himself standing on the porch, watching the interactions between Ayanna and the children, marveling at how seamlessly she had become woven into the fabric of their lives. He remembered the day she had arrived, quiet and reserved, and how cautious he had been about letting a stranger into their home. Now, she was the heart of the household, providing stability, patience, and love that the children needed more than words could describe. John felt a profound sense of gratitude. Hiring her had been more than a practical decision. It had been a turning point for all of them. One crisp morning, John awoke before sunrise, as was his habit, and made his way to the barn. The air was fresh with the scent of dew, and the sky was painted in gentle shades of pink and gold. As he approached, he saw Ayanna already at work, moving quietly among the animals, her hands steady and careful. Emma and Ben were nearby, laughing softly as they helped with the chores, their energy light and joyful. John paused, feeling a rare sense of peace. Life on the ranch was still hard work, but now it was balanced with connection, care, and shared purpose. Later that morning, an incident occurred that would further cement the bond between Ayanna and the Carson family. While the children were playing near the barn, a sudden gust of wind blew through, causing a stack of hay bales to topple dangerously close to Ben. Ayanna reacted instantly, scooping him into her arms and pulling him to safety. Emma, alarmed but trusting, ran to her side, and Ayanna wrapped her in the same protective embrace. The storm outside may have been gone, but moments like these reminded John that life on a ranch could still be unpredictable, and the presence of someone as vigilant and caring as Ayanna was invaluable. After ensuring that the children were safe and unharmed, Ayanna sat with them in the corner of the barn, holding them close until they calmed completely. She whispered softly, telling stories and humming lullabies, her voice steady and soothing. John watched, a lump forming in his throat. He realized that this act, repeated countless times over the weeks and months, had created an unspoken trust between them. The children knew that she would always protect them, guide them, and care for them, and that trust had become the foundation of their lives. As the days turned into weeks, the family settled into a new rhythm that balanced work, learning, and joy. Yana continued to teach the children practical skills, feeding the animals, cleaning the barn, and tending to the garden. But she also imparted lessons of patience, resilience, and empathy, helping Emma and Ben grow not only as children but as thoughtful, capable individuals. John noticed how their confidence blossomed, how their curiosity and sense of responsibility deepened, and he knew that Ayana's influence was shaping them in ways that would last a lifetime. One afternoon, John found himself sharing a quiet moment with Ayana. They sat on a bench outside the barn, watching the children play in the orchard. "I can't thank you enough," he said softly. "I thought I was just hiring help, but you've given us so much more. You've changed their lives and mine too." Yana smiled, her eyes reflecting the warmth of her care. "I only did what I could," she replied. "You and the children gave me a chance, and we've all helped each other." "That's how life works, isn't it?" John nodded, realizing the truth in her words. Their connection had become mutual, a bond formed not just through work or necessity, but through shared respect, kindness, and love. As the season shifted toward winter, the ranch prepared for the colder months. Ayana continued her steady work, ensuring the animals were cared for and the barns were prepared for harsh weather. The children learned how to help with these preparations, their small hands carrying firewood, stacking hay, and learning to check on the animals with confidence. John watched them, proud of their progress and deeply appreciative of Ayana's guidance. He knew that their childhoods, once overshadowed by grief and uncertainty, were now filled with stability, learning, and love. One particularly cold evening, John returned to the barn after a long day in the fields to find a scene that would stay with him forever. The wind howled outside, and the first snowflakes of the season began to drift down from the sky. Inside the barn, the children were asleep in Ayana's arms, wrapped in blankets and resting against her chest. Her gentle hum filled the room, a melody that had become a source of comfort for them. John's heart swelled with emotion as he watched her care for them, realizing that the love and trust between them had reached a profound depth. This was more than protection. It was nurturing, guidance, and unconditional care all in one. From that night onward, the bond between Ayana and the Carson family became unshakable. The children thrived under her care, their laughter and curiosity filling the ranch with life. John found himself less burdened, able to focus on his work, and enjoy moments of peace he hadn't experienced in years. Ayana's presence brought balance and harmony, transforming the ranch from a place of labor and survival into a home filled with warmth, learning, and love. As winter settled over the desert, the family gathered together by the fire in the main house, the children sharing stories of the day's adventures while Ayana listened with quiet attention, her hands busy knitting or preparing small meals. John realized that life on the ranch had taken on a new meaning. It was no longer just about hard work, survival, and duty. It was about connection, care, and the joy of shared experiences. Yana had brought all of these into their lives, and in doing so, had created a sense of home that they had been missing for so long. The years that followed were not without challenges, but the Carson family faced them together, stronger and more united than ever. Emma and Ben grew into confident, kind, and capable children, carrying with them the lessons of patience, resilience, and empathy that Ayana had taught them. John found peace and balance in his life, understanding that the love and care of others could be just as vital as hard work and determination. And Ayana, who had arrived on the ranch seeking work, became an irreplaceable part of the family, her quiet strength and gentle guidance leaving a lasting mark on all their hearts. In the end, the story of that summer, the arrival of the Apache widow who had come to clean the barn, became a story of hope, trust, and the transformative power of kindness. What had begun as a practical decision had grown into something far greater, a connection that healed wounds, nurtured growth, and created a family bound not just by circumstance, but by love and care. John often reflected on that first day, realizing that life had brought them Ayanna not just to help with chores, but to bring warmth, stability, and hope into their lives. And as the sun set over the ranch on a quiet winter evening, John watched his children play near the barn, laughter echoing through the cold air, and saw Ayanna guiding them with patience and love. He understood, in a way he had never known before, that sometimes life's greatest gifts arrive in the most unexpected ways. One quiet, kind-hearted woman had turned their lives around, creating a home, a family, and a future filled with hope, connection, and love. And in that moment, John Carson knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be, together, safe and cared for, ready to face whatever life would bring next.